Welcome back, everybody, to 3-Point Range. Yes, we did take a little bit of a holiday hiatus, you might say, but it was done with the idea that we needed to build up some amazing points so we could bring those to you today. And we had to survive some issues over the break, including our producer had a problem with some frozen hair that we had to get her through that inside story. We won't get into it. Mm-hmm. But so we're back and we're anxious to get 2025 off to a rollicking start. And I think the best way to do it is to just launch right into it. So, Shelby, what do you got in 2025?
Yes, so right now in 2025, what I would like to go ahead and get into, obviously we're still in the midst of, the NFL postseason, but just want to go around and ask the group to do a little bit of reflecting, early in the year in January. I think it's a good time to do that. So I want you guys to both think on just plays that stood out to you from the 2024 NFL season. What would you say is the top highlights? And it doesn't have to be in terms of significance, but if you think of like the most wow moment in terms of like athleticism, like top SC worthy highlight of the NFL season.
Wow. All right, well, you got a couple of different questions there. But when sorry, but
highlight play.
When I think back on the season, all I see are lowlights and Aaron Rodgers panicking in the pocket as if he were Zach Wilson, and just my pitiful Jets. So then, to answer the second part of your question or your follow up, I guess it's so much Lamar. We've spoken about Lamar here before. I think I made a point that I thought he was the best athlete ever, just in terms of pure athleticism. And so I still am often amazed by Lamar Jackson.
As am I.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue that, but I think I've made it clear in recent podcasts that ever since I stopped playing fantasy football, I haven't really paid that close attention to the NFL anymore. But what I feel like I'm bombarded with, and I don't know that this fits in very well with your point, is that the athleticism of receivers and the fact that the Odell Beckham catch now seems to be repeated on an almost weekly basis by some receiver. It's become almost routine. Is part of what is when I feel like I'm paying attention at all to the NFL and I'm seeing highlights. That's what I'm seeing. So I'm seeing that sort of level of athleticism becoming routine. But I'm sure you're trying to lead us somewhere. So where are you trying to take us?
Yes. So I would vote Saquon Barkley's electrifying backward hurdle. Okay, Eagles Week 9 win over the Jaguars, and I think it is, for me, one of the most unforgettable moments of the season, just in terms of display of raw athleticism. He broke a tackle, spun away from another defender, and then he pulled off that gravity-defying leap over Jerry and Jones. Just jaw on the floor, and it didn't just go viral, but it made its way into Madden NFL 2025. Pretty quick work, I will say, on the makers of that game. So shout out the coders that had to put in the overtime on that. But I think it's more than just a flashy moment. It's emblematic of the unique skill set that running backs like Barkley bring to the game in an era that has really undervalued the running back. So that's what I wanted to talk with you guys about a little bit today. And is the 2024 season, is this season so far sort of a renaissance moment for running backs in the NFL? I would argue yes. I think the league appears to be, as well as fans, rediscovering the value of elite running backs in a Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry for the Ravens, Bijan Robinson down in Atlanta. I think past trends have devalued their importance, but these players are making undeniable cases for there's significance in high-performing offenses. I mean, again, take Henry's performance just this past weekend for the Ravens, and Lamar Jackson didn't even really have words for it other than just comparing him to Lightning McQueen. I don't know if you guys saw that interview clip, but quite funny. And then Barkley, nothing super flashy, but just a lot of just really, short yardage plays. And obviously, recently I know he's kind of pissed off a lot of bettors when he slid instead of going for that touchdown, but just really the selflessness in that moment when he's flirting with the rushing record, it brings a smile to your face. But anyways, going back to it, I mean, I think just the financial undervaluation of running backs is super stark when compared to other offensive weapons, but obviously they've been critical to so many team successes. I think a lot of defensive adjustments now are kind of driving the change, just a league-wide decrease in big passing games. There's a really great article on ESPN.com by a DTH alum, Brooke Pryor, that she wrote on that, and just the kind of looking at like a Patrick Mahomes-esque offense and the inflation of, more of like the check down game versus the long ball. But I think part of that, right, you look at these defensive strategies like, your two high safety formations, and there's a lot of opportunities now for ground games to thrive. Obviously, we can kind of go back more into the historical context. I'm sure you guys might be able to speak more to that, going back to like Denver's Broncos.
You mean because we're old?
Well, maybe. But I would say experienced, knowledgeable, wise, any of those words. Anyways, I just think that you look at, Barkley now, some of the dual threat systems, really versatile backfields like with Henry and Jackson for the Ravens, or, Gibbs Montgomery for the Lions. And I don't know, the more I look at it, I see a shifting narrative. I think running backs for a while have kind of been considered replaceable. Certainly, and again, it's like, oh, boo-hoo, these, athletes are making so much money, but in terms of their undervaluation to other players, I don't know. I think things are starting to shift, and I think the 2024 season may be a turning point for how the league evaluates and compensates this position. Guys, I threw a lot at you, but want to get some thoughts.
Well, I got to talk. Oh, no. I have to talk
go
next
ahead.
because
My bad.
it's so unlikely that I would be able to say anything of any use on this topic that I would have to make sure that Kimball doesn't scoop me, because if he did, then I would have absolutely nothing to say. But thank God my son was back over break and forced me to watch a little bit of the NFL because he has a fantasy team, and so I got into watching the Lions and the Vikings game the other day, and one of the broadcasters made this point. So obviously it's not my own; I'm totally stealing it, but it is. I do think it's notable that I remember I do like to watch the draft sometimes, and at least the first round. And I remember when Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted, and just how the Lions were just torched for drafting. And I don't know exactly where he was drafted, somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, and just the thought that you would spend a first round pick, a 10 to 15 pick, on Jahmyr Gibbs, a running back, what? Mm-hmm. And then I was watching that game the other night, and Jahmyr Gibbs is pretty damn good, and he essentially, dominated that game. And I think that he is certainly an example of someone who, from the running back position, who has had a phenomenal year, who has been a huge reason why the Lions are the number one seed in the NFC, and. If you're looking for someone who's a little bit under the radar in terms of the Derrick Henry level guy, or Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs is another example of somebody who just has just blown up, and I think it's safe to say that the Lions wouldn't be where they are without him. So he's another argument for why running backs have become more relevant.
100%. And I mean, that was, you mentioned it there, but Lions beating the Vikings there, and to win the NFC North, that was 31-9. And I believe, just pulled up the AP game story on ESPN, but Gibbs scored 3 of his franchise record, tying 4 touchdowns in the second half. And again, that's against a a pretty solid Minnesota Vikings defense. But I want to also kick it over to the scout because I know he was ready to jump in there.
I am ready to jump in. All right. So while I will grant you that in some ways the pendulum may have swung back a little bit because I think the NFL just went totally anti-running back, as you point out, with like the shock and awe of a guy being picked that high when that used to be obviously very commonplace. I think part of that is, teams now are lighter. They're more geared to rushing the passer and defending the pass, playing more defensive back. So it's like, hey, guess what? We can pound them. But I will push back on a couple of things because one, I mean, you didn't mention, of course, that there was so much talk about Barkley going for the rushing record, which of course, I thought was going to be tainted anyway by, well, it's 17 games.
Right.
It's a lot easier to get 2,000 yards in 17 games than back in our day when I was there when OJ went over 2,014 games.
Shades of Charlie Scott, Armando Bacot, if you know.
But the biggest thing I want to point out is I will maintain until my deathbed that football is the ultimate team game, and there's 11 guys out there. And I heard an interesting stat. Again, I am not taking credit for this, but I heard it on the broadcast last night, and I believe I got it right when they were raving about, they were talking about Saquon Barkley. They made the point that on average, he gets 2 yards, he gains 2 yards before he is even touched. A full yard more than the next closest back in the NFL. And I hope I have that right. Again, I didn't really expect it. Have to come up with that, but I believe I heard that right, and that just blew me away. And Philadelphia has 3 All-Pro offensive linemen, and they dominate the line of scrimmage. And I would say, like, well, it sounds like Tim could maybe get 2 yards at a carry at least.
Basketball is really my game. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, I know. So and again, I think it is fun that these running backs, it is fun to watch them. Gibbs' performance was electric, but again, it's so much easier to gain 10 yards when your first 5 you're untouched. And I thought that happened a lot in that game too. So I will push back a bit on your premise.
And it should be also pointed out that running backs, this is not Jim Brown days anymore where it's just like hand him the ball and go off tackle and he just pounds people into submission. I mean, part of Jahmyr Gibbs' value, from what I could tell watching that game the other night, is that he's in a great pass catcher too. And it's not just you're not just a running back anymore. You are a running back who is essentially a third or fourth receiver as well. And that Gibbs obviously does that really well. It's maybe not so much Derrick Henry, but Saquon's a good pass catcher too. Right.
Yeah, and I mean that was a game there where, I think Jalen Hurts and just their passing game with the Eagles has struggled a little bit. And I mean, you have who is it? Was it Dotson? I mean, there's a wideout that was like over on the sidelines, literally reading like a self-help book.
AJ Brown, yeah.
That was AJ Brown. Thank you.
Brown.
So I mean, the wideouts can very much sit back and relax just with that offensive line they have and what it's created for them in the run game. And I think that their longest yardage in terms of, I guess, through the air, it might have been that touchdown by the tight end, and I think that was in the backfield. That was like a 2-yarder in the backfield. Anyways, yeah, I think, again, team sport, it is really important to note the just great pockets for, Jalen Hurts that these offensive lines are creating. And I know that's after, his recent performances, Barkley has taken the time, like you just did, Scout, to shout out the offensive line and their versatility. So that is very important to note as well. Again, you don't have a stellar standout year here at UNC for Amari and Hampton without your Willie Lampkin. So
Shout out to Willie Lampkin. There you go.
ACC's shortest O lineman.
This as we begin to transition to point two, it should be noted that that the scout and I actually got together this past weekend. I drove to Boston and we went. Yeah, sorry. We went to a couple of Boston College sporting events, and we got to chatting. And this is just the kind of magic of 3-point range, is that you didn't see it coming, and then all of a sudden there's a point. It just pops up out of nowhere, and I think obviously the collaboration of the two of our 3-point brains there together brought it out. But go ahead, Kimmel. You tell us what we sort of stumbled onto.
Well, it was interesting. As you pointed out, it sort of like grew on me, this point. And so we were sitting at the basketball game, a stellar basketball game between Boston College and Syracuse.
Let's go Orange.
And as some of you might know, I've been writing about college basketball a lot on the Substack.
Yeah, plug it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's rare that we have a crossover point here, and I will be writing about this. But so Boston College sort of let a lead slip away, and a lot of that was the certain player on the court. I don't know if I should mention, just because I'm trying in my Substack to really not make it about like finger pointing and criticizing players, but more about X's and O's. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so anyway, but and so I should point out that even I was like, wow, I'm surprised this guy's on the court for these moments, because he had been struggling so much. But then we got to the post-game press conference, and this might be of interest to you, Shelby, but they're usually people, as you know, ask pretty safe, innocuous questions. They don't want to piss people off, especially a coach after a loss. Yep. But this young journalist, I give him credit in some ways. Here's what he said. He said, "Coach, I want to ask you about player's name. He has struggled this season, and he was in the game during that extended Syracuse 13-1 run. What do you still see in him, and why do you continue to play him over other players?" Over parentheses, other players. Now, Shelby, have you ever asked that? Have you ever asked that of Hubert? What do you continue to see in him, and why do you continue to play him? Anyway, the Boston College coach,
I don't think I phrased it like that.
No, he took it well, and he had a very measured response, and part of his response was saying that he's one of our more veteran players, and he has only so many minutes for guards. But the key thing he said that again became something that I really passionately believe in is, he said, you people in the media and the fans see games only. I see practices. We practiced 4 times this week, since our last game when the guy struggled. And I see who does well in practice. I see who wins drills in practice. I see who comes early in practice. I see who stays late. I see what guys do in practice, and I base my decisions more on what I see in practice than what I've seen in games. And again, the more I thought about that, the more I thought that is so dead on. And I think it's something that I really don't think fans get. They're surprised sometimes when all of a sudden a player gets more playing time when his season so far has been bad, but they don't know that kid's maybe coming along in practice. He's maybe figuring it out. Even something as simple as, sometimes when there's a technical foul and we have to choose a shooter to shoot the technical foul, and someone might look at the percentages. It's like, okay, well, that guy might be 8 of 10 in games on the season, but when I watch practice, this guy is 95%, and the guy that's 8 out of 10 is makes half his free throws. And that's a pretty simplistic example. And of course, there is something to, guys stepping up in games, but as coaches, we really have to trust what we see in practice more, and go by that, and it informs our decisions so much more. So I kind of respected that about Coach Grant. Now, tell me, you two, do you agree or disagree with that idea?
Well, first of all, can you answer the question of whether you are the one basketball coach amongst us? Is that something that you would do, that you would sort of avert your eyes from what's happening on the court and just say, I trust this guy because of what he did in practice last week?
Yeah, in a way, because that's all you do is you trust, like as I'm going to point out in my piece that's coming up, is that part of being a coach is you're predicting the future, right? You're informed by the past, but you have to say, well, I know this guy might have 37 points, but I don't know if he can score again the rest of the game, or vice versa. You're trying to predict the future of what's going to happen, and what informs you is everything you've seen and know, and about the player and about their team. And so, yeah, like I will sometimes do that. The classic thing is like you'll take a kid out that's made 3 shots in a row, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, but I don't see that continuing to happen, just because fans might think he's on a roll, or it's going to keep happening.
Is it momentum?
Yeah, exactly. They'll get into that. That'll be a future point we can talk about. But so you really do. You just have to trust what you see, in over long haul, not just that moment. And even in that game, it wasn't like this player had committed 4 turnovers in a row. In fact, I'd have to really go back and look to see if he was at fault for that 13-1 run. There's can be a lot of good players on the floor when the other team goes on a 13-1 run. It's not always, it doesn't mean it's his fault. And that wasn't like a high turnover game for that player. He didn't seem to be screwing up left and right. But even if he were, it's like, look, I trust him to make the next play, or like, I know he's not the best offensive player, but he's there to shut down their best offensive player. Things like that come into it. Shelby, come on.
I mean, I don't know if I can push back too much on that. I mean, I'm gonna agree with what you said there. I'm gonna have to go back and look for myself to see if I can devise who player X was. And I wish I had admittedly heard this story before I logged off of the ACC coaches call this Monday morning, right when the Boston College coach was beginning to speak. But yeah, I mean, 100%. I think, and it's something that's I think is fueled so much by this kind of like message board, Twitter fan culture where everyone has an opinion and everyone thinks that they can coach better than insert their team's coach, right? I know that me and my 2 brothers who go to NC State like to joke that oftentimes during their NC State men's basketball games, as soon as a player misses a shot, they will turn and say to their friends, "Fire Keats." Just literally a player missing their shot, just kind of poking fun at that whole culture. But yeah, I mean, there's this big movement, I know, for a good portion of the UNC season where, and obviously we can get into, and I think I've probably talked about on or off this pod, just the kind of roster construction, issues, the lack of really a super competent big man, although Jalen Washington did play very well against NC State, I thought, and obviously his stat line and the double-double show that. There was a call to, they said, free James Brown. Okay, that's the freshman who came in with Ian Jackson, Drake Powell. A lot of people forget about him, probably because he does not play. But, just a really fun, goggled presence on the bench. A lot of energy, really great with the celebrations. And I love that. He's very clearly into the game from what I can see on the sidelines. But I'm going to tell you right now, I have seen maybe a portion of one practice that he was in, and they were doing like 3, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain, you'll know what I'm talking about, Scout, but coast to coast, okay, 3 dribbles layup, right? Just trying to work on pushing the ball out in transition. And right. It's something that's I did all the time in high school, and I'm about 5'8". I'm not particularly fast or tall, but I can make it down the court in 3 dribbles and lay it up. And he either missed the layup or traveled every single time in that. And like, again, I don't mean this to just like completely trash on someone. I'm not a fan of like name, but again, like that
you should
is
have player X'd him.
Well, sorry, but that is a player that I did see practice slightly, and then come all the cries for, Hubert Davis to put James Brown in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, like, I might know 15 minutes what they don't know, but like Coach Davis at that point has hours of tape, on this kid. So again, I always kind of think of that when I see these calls from, fans and the couch coaches, right, to put certain players in. Like, these coaches, know a lot more, than we do in terms of evaluating talent, because that is literally their day in, day out job. And so, most of the time, again, and like, this young journalist did, I mean, I would have maybe phrased it slightly differently, credit to them. They asked, and that coach actually did, shockingly, I say that ironically, have a reason, right, for, putting that, player in. A lot of times, like you said, it has to do with what they're seeing, not necessarily, during game time, but a lot of the times during practice. And some of it is truly just, behavior, discipline. Maybe this is a player that, like you mentioned, has really been putting in the extra work, showing up early, staying late, and something like that, right, merits them coming in at a certain point, despite what they've put on film in games.
Well, exactly. And, we don't often, like at high school, you don't really let parents in to watch practice. But sometimes I almost want to, because I want to say, like, I want to show you why your son doesn't play that much. And, every team has done this. I probably had at least one player on every team I've ever had, where a kid just doesn't know the plays. He doesn't know where he's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And he could look good in a uniform and even like look good in warm-ups. But a kid not knowing the plays is worse than a kid not being able to make a shot, because he will screw it up. You don't have to get the kid who can't make a shot the ball, but a kid that doesn't know where he's supposed to be can really screw things up. And that's something you see in practice. A lot of times you just go like, he's not ready to play, and maybe Brown is, as you said, not ready to play. All right, Tim, go.
Well, I'm more interested in sort of how the roller coaster of a long college basketball season. I do feel like that's the key managing element for a coach is. I mean, there was a time when Jalen Washington was basically they seemed like they've given up on him. That they he starts the season as, all right, he is the absolute declared Armando Bacot heir to the throne,
which is so much pressure to put on someone.
Tons. And our vaunted student paper writes a story in the opening basketball tab about how this, he's done all this work in the off season, he's put on some weight, and this is going to be his coming out party. And clearly at the beginning of the season he was not ready to assume that role. And then there were games where he wasn't even starting, and games where he was just, like entire halves where he was barely playing, and it looked as if he'd essentially been shuttled out. And then here we go, the game, this monster game for UNC against NC State the other day, and you wonder, well, where is he now in the pecking order? And I didn't get to see the whole game because I was watching this other game, and this player fail miserably for Boston College down the stretch. But there's Jalen Washington at the end, and two plays that I haven't seen him make all year. One was the play from the pass from Cadeau, where he actually had to catch a very difficult pass to catch.
Yes.
And normally
that should have been a turnover.
Yeah, but I mean, when the pass was thrown, based on what I've seen of Jalen Washington so far this year, I would have expected him to either fumble it or just turn it over. And instead, he caught the ball and turned around and dunked it and put him ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I will say before that, he also had the assist to Ian Jackson for a 3-pointer that gave UNC a 2-point lead.
Correct.
So he had that, then the dunk, and then
yes, in the final play of the game where State took the ball to the hoop against Cadeau, and Jalen rotated over, and he was there for the block, and that's those two plays were the difference in the final minute of the game and getting them over the hump, and you just wonder, I wonder if there's a time where Hubert just thought, Jalen's just never going to be able to get there, and it's time to start developing James Brown a little bit and see if he can do something. I do think part of what saved Jalen is the fact that they don't have a lot of other great options, and so if they did have somebody else behind him, he might be sitting the bench right now. But I do think it's just a fascinating process that over the course of a basketball season, how all of these players ride the roller coaster, and I think it's just a good lesson for a coach that you can't ever just give up on somebody, especially when you're in Carolina's position where they just don't have enough depth to be able to give up on somebody.
You literally can't. Like, you can give up on a Cade Tyson, but you can't give up on a Jalen Washington.
I don't think you even give up on a Cade Tyson.
No, you can't. Shelby.
You can't give up on Cade Tyson.
Especially a guy that is a shooter that's not shooting well. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think he inexplicably lost his ability to shoot. Now, let me say, because this is almost like we can segue all our points, together, because we're kind of going to go into Tim's point here.
Let's do it.
As a coach, there can be so many reasons why guys play or don't play. We've talked about some of them. Like, some might be just disciplinary. He missed 2 practices. He's not doing what I want. Some might be matchups. Like, okay, last game he dominated because he was playing against this. Well, now he's playing against that. Sometimes it's just we haven't seen the effort we need. And with Jalen, it was I think he probably just wasn't ready, or he hadn't gotten the message, or he hadn't something. He hadn't realized just what he needs to do, or maybe it was a matchup thing. But all these things come into play, and the bench can help guys figure it out. They can say, like, you're not playing hard enough, you're not playing tough enough, or who knows what. It was always interesting with him because I thought his was a bit of a confidence issue. Like, I saw him missing shots that I thought he could make early in the year. And that's a tough one, because how do you give a guy confidence? Do you let him sit out and think about it for a while, and maybe that makes it worse? Do you keep going to him, but the games are, falling by the wayside and you're losing because he keeps missing the shots? There's so many factors. But, and then I think, let me just say, kind of it might kind of go into Tim's point, but coaches don't do themselves favors in a lot of these cases because they're not always honest about why they play or don't play guys.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And even going to our specific example, if Coach Grant had said, look, he's had his struggles offensively, this player, but he's still our best defensive player, and we had tried everybody else to shut down Syracuse's top offensive player, and it didn't work, so I thought I'd try that. But I think sometimes they're afraid to be that honest and reveal too many strengths and weaknesses about their players, so they just eat those words. And I always like to say, hey, it's out there. I want the strengths and weaknesses of everybody to be pretty honest, all pretty honest about it, and so we can deal with these things.
Yeah, well, I think it is a good segue into our final point. Now that Kimball has trashed player X up and down, and then
I have not,
and Shelby has trashed James Brown and Cade Tyson. It brings up a point about how we approach that issue of criticism.
Mm-hmm. And again, always separating the criticism of someone's play from them as a person.
Correct. Oh, of course.
That goes without saying.
We're only talking about athletes and our criticisms of athletes, not them as human beings.
Full respect.
I thought the most interesting thing that occurred during our holiday hiatus, to me, was the Mick Cronin moment. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Mick had a bit of a meltdown. He's the UCLA basketball coach.
Did he have a crash out?
I guess you could, in your vernacular, yes. I think it was kind of a crash out. And he had a rough game at Michigan. And I think what he did was really interesting after the game. He was asked a question, and as journalists Shelby and I know, we're always demanding honesty. We love honesty. We want you to tell us exactly what's going on in your head. And yet, unfortunately, sometimes there are times when you can be too honest, apparently. Because Mick Cronin said, and I feel the need to share this at length, unfortunately, because it's so out there. He said, when asked about his team, he said, "We're soft. I have to run on the court to get guys to play hard. It's crazy, and it's every day. I'm tired of it. I have the most energy of anybody at practice every day. I'm upset with everybody in that locker room, my assistant coaches and my players. I don't need to do anything else. I almost got 500 wins. I'm only 53. You'd think I'm coaching the Lakers. I mean, it's a joke." And then he goes on later to say, "I come in and I have more passion, energy, and pride than everybody, and that's the problem. The truth of it has been it's really hard to coach people that are delusional. The hungry dog gets the bone. We got guys that think they're way better than they are. They're nice kids. They're completely delusional about who they are. The problem," I told them, I said, "the toughest guy in the room can't be me every day. It can't." Okay. Wow. So I'm going to tell you that I think Mick Cronin is speaking for almost every coach in college basketball these days. I truly believe that this is not an isolated thought, that this is something that almost every coach, except of course for my boy Danny Hurley, because they don't have any culture issues there. But right. At almost every college program, they have this issue. And the truth is, we all have it. Anyone who's ever coached, we understand. I mean, Kimball with his middle school team.
Absolutely.
And me, I mean, I can go back to coaching Atticus and his friends when they were 7 years old to when they were 14 years old. I rec coached. And I'll tell you what, in 7th grade, Sam Williams, you were delusional, Sam. You were delusional. And you were soft. You were soft.
Sam.
You were soft, Sam. You were soft.
What's Sam do? Yeah.
And I finally get to say it. You were soft and delusional, Sam.
It was like a middle schooler.
I made the name up, okay? I made the name up. But I can picture him in my head. I don't remember his name, but I can picture him in my head. And he was soft and delusional. And I had several guys on every team for 7 years who were soft and delusional. And I wanted to say it. And when the media came by after those games, I was tempted always to say, Sam is soft and delusional.
Ain't no media.
Yeah.
Damn lie. All right,
Bottom line is that yes, this is something that happens it happens in the minds of coaches everywhere, every day. Mick Cronin just made the mistake of articulating it publicly because obviously it's not okay for him to trash his players. But I do think it's okay for coaches to coach their players through the media. I have met a million coaches over my journalistic life, and every single one of them coaches through the media. They just don't coach that bluntly. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and again, kind of taking a little bit of a page out of Jay Billis and what he had to say in terms of the post-game rant, and I kind of tend to agree with him. I will say directly in terms of that thought that Cronin's speaking for a lot of coaches, 100% no doubt. And I mean, you're going to deal with in coaching some players that simply think they're better than they are without putting the work in. I've dealt with the same thing with writers that I edited for, and they would complain about not getting certain assignments.
Ouch. Can you give us some of their names?
I won't, but
that's what Sam Williams does now.
That's something that I've faced, and both of my parents are teachers, and they've dealt with parents of children that think that their child is insanely gifted, and they're like, in my mom's case, she's a kindergarten teacher, like just at grade level, like there's a lot of delusion about, I'm the best, my kid is the best, yeah, I get that. But at the same time, if you are a coach, and I know that recruiting has become a lot harder, obviously, and the era of the transfer portal, the NIL, all that, but you recruit and you're evaluating based on not just talent but also character. And that's something that you have to take into consideration. I just had a conversation just this morning speaking with Coach Hubert Davis on the ACC coaches call, and we were discussing Drake Powell a little bit, and I was writing a feature on him, and he said that one of the things that stood out when he went to Northwood High School, local school here in the area, to see Drake, not only did his versatility stand out, but the way that he carried himself and the family he came from, the type of kid he was. He also speaks very highly about another freshman star, Ian Jackson, who really boisterous guy, really confident kid, but he texts Coach Davis every single day asking him, hey, what can I do to get better? Like, there's a work ethic there. You're recruiting that as much as the talent. And then once you get those players, it is your job to, create a culture that breeds the hardworking. Again, easier said than done, but you can do that many ways. It can be a really intense, like, Hurley, I'm going to yell and curse at you. It can be more of the Davis and the, like, heebie-jeebies, whatever. Maybe you're one of those coaches that you get mad and you just, like, stare and let people figure it out. Maybe you do a Coach K. Okay, I'm kicking you guys out of the locker room. You can't wear jerseys, team gear for a week. I think, like, Jason Tatum shared that story in the past. But, like, it is ultimately on you. And I think what we have seen now is frustration due to failed teaching. And maybe that's something that he's doing. Maybe it just isn't landing based on the audience. But guess what? Like, you're drafting that, you get to pick that audience. And it's so much easier now in the transfer portal era to do a complete locker room wipeout. So I better see, if he thinks that all his players are soft, a complete wipe.
Right. And what about it? Yeah, and he's hired all those assistant coaches.
And you've hired all these assistants. It comes down to
basically you've in our NIL world, you've hired them all. You've hired everybody. Those are all your people. And now you're saying, they're all soft. Well,
and I think there's a way to do this where you can say that, and you hear this from coaches all the time, like, I think that our team played soft, or I think that we aren't acting tough enough. But then the next step is, hey, you're the head coach. You take responsibility. And this looks like blame, and just, as somebody who has, taken several, like, leadership classes and, like, studied different, like, theoretical models on this thing. I mean, this is just antithetical to, like, everything that is taught. You as a leader, you're supposed to take accountability, and you can, again, express frustration, but never blame, because number one, that's just not being a good leader. Number two, it's completely inaccurate, because you are responsible for the players that you recruit, the coaches that you hire, and to a degree, it is on you to then teach them and coach them in a way that produces, a toughness. And also, I mean, I think he's just completely off his rocker right now. I mean, game after that, he was ejected in the second half after receiving back-to-back technical fouls. So I think maybe Mick Cronin needs a spa day or to meditate, or I don't know, something. The next game he
complained about not only the referees,
right? Again, not his fault,
but like, also the scheduling, the Big Ten scheduling. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, UCLA, but you volunteered for that horrible scheduling nightmare of being a West Coast team in the Big Ten. What's next?
Did he, like, wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Were his eggs cooked for breakfast not to his like? I mean, like,
well, if you're important, if you want to bring in the human element, it should be noted let's put it in context. That if you did a little deep dive on this. Mick Cronin's house is very close to the fires in LA right now. And so literally he has packed a bag of all of his valuables like by the front door, and at any moment it's potentially his house could burn down. So there is if we talk about life on the human side,
that could be impacting a level of stress.
There is a piece of that, and I think it's important for us to point that out. That it's when you're a basketball coach, you have other things going on in your life.
Life happens.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, though, obviously,
sometimes as a coach, you got to burn it down, baby. and no, seriously,
that's very politically incorrect, but okay.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm going to bet that UCLA plays better than it has. UCLA plays better than it has so far going forward. I'm going to say that leadership courses, might be one thing, but realistically, especially when you're talking about players, you sometimes have to dig in there and find the trigger. Now, look, I think he said some dumb things there, especially he should never say, I've got the 500 wins, I'm this and that. No.
I'm a man, I'm 40.
I'm sorry.
That was
you sound like
crazy.
An asshole.
That was crazy to say. But Tim, you're absolutely right. Every coach has ever coached at any level has felt some of those things. And yes, the hardest kid to coach is the kid that doesn't get it and is delusional. And I think this was, I think you can say those things in private, say those things a different way, but I bet you he already did. And this was like the last resort. This was like, okay, I can't get it through to these guys enough that they need to play harder. And if I have to embarrass them and take that chance, I will. And we've seen that work before. Now, yes, of course, it could backfire. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens to UCLA going forward with everything we've discussed. But I think they're with so much of what he said was stupid and short-sighted. But I do think that there's something to it. And sometimes, again, when you're motivating players to go to the deepest, darkest levels, one of my favorite movies is Whiplash,
yes.
which involves music. And I think sometimes you've got to just like get ugly.
Sometimes you have to throw the symbol, man.
To inspire genius and to get these players to play the highest levels. And he's not trying to, just be top 25 team. He's going for national titles. And so he's thinking we're not getting anywhere close to that right now, so I'm going to go for it. It'll be very interesting to see what happens going forward.
Kimball, as someone who is also from my generation, don't you think this is just a Gen Z problem? I mean, let's face it.
No,
it's just a Gen Z problem.
No,
shout out to our future marketing director, who just wrote in her brilliant Celia scribbles about the Gen Z issues and all the all the problems with keeping Gen Z motivated.
I need to check it out.
Yeah.
Link to the Substack in the newsletter.
Exactly. It's all part. Do you think that we had as many issues like this when our boy Dean was coaching the boys back in the 80s and 90s?
I don't know. I kind of hate when coaches say kids today and get off my lawn, that kind of thing. Like I think there's just different challenges, and that's the coach's challenge, is to push those buttons. And I do agree with Shelby, like that's, and I've written about this too, like a coach's job is to teach them and to find a way to get it there. And I think Cronin was like, you don't think I've already taught them the X's and O's? You don't think I've already taught them the technique? You don't think I've already tried to push them physically? Well, maybe I just have to just go full ballistic nonsense, crazy man, and do it. Now, it might backfire, but I have a funny feeling it's similar to what, St. John's played better after Patino had a similar rant last year. And I think it's kind of a similar case.
Oh, that was iconic. Yeah.
Well, let me just say that both of you in your own way are delusional, but I love you anyway. Are we done?
We are done.
On that note,
I thought so.
We'll do better. Thank you for that. We'll do better.
Thank you.
I'm going to see whether that comment improves your here's your attitude and performance in our next podcast, which I hope will be a little sooner than this one was after our most recent break. But let's wrap it up by saying, first of all, as always, thank you to our masterful executive producer who has unfrozen her hair, Sarah Ellis. Thank you for all that you do.
Yes.
And now for the Delusional Scout and the Delusional Prospect, I am the very non-delusional Professor Tim Crothers, signing off, pulling up from the 3, and good.